Greetings and thank you for dropping by my channel. My name's Duncan and this is the Grumpy News, brought to you from Australia and providing commentary, opinion and reflecting upon the issues of the day, which are myriad in nature and astonishingly deep, giving us pause for thought. I want to speak again today about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And I've just been watching my favorite YouTube channel, which is with Jake Bro, who's an American commentator and a great supporter of Ukraine. He's done a number of fundraising events online to provide supplies and trucks to Ukraine and assist them in their fight for what is essentially survival. So he's a great supporter of Ukraine, and my views are, of course, that this war that Russia instigated is an illegal act, and I will reflect the words of Chomsky, who I saw interviewed. Noam Chomsky was interviewed some months ago, and he called the Russian invasion of Ukraine an act of criminal stupidity. There's no better way than to put it in those terms. One of the things that we do have to remember, and again on Jake's YouTube channel, I did see him talking today about Trump, this attempt to get a deal whereby the United States would be supplied with certain minerals, resources from Ukraine. In principle, I think this is a terrific idea. What it will mean is that American interests will be coupled with those of Ukraine. Some time ago, Winston Churchill, the great statesman, he said, in order to understand international relations, you have to understand one thing, and that is there's no friends or enemies in terms of international relations. There are only interests. So if the United States had significant interests with Ukraine, this would mean that America would be more motivated to protect that country and its supply chain. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of confidence in the way that Trump is approaching this at the moment. It seems piecemeal, somewhat disorganized, and he's responding minute to minute, depending on whether his ego is being bolstered or not by whoever he's having a conversation with. So I don't see any cohesive strategy here. However, perhaps he's a master technician and he's just putting everyone off balance, including the Russians. And maybe he does have some internalized cohesive strategy. And maybe the end point will be support for Ukraine. We certainly hope so. But in addition to that, I did want to mention one thing, and that it's important to remember and to recognize that with Vladimir Putin in power in Russia, there will never be peace with Ukraine. And this is why my own view is that fundamentally there must be an arrangement and an agreement for Ukraine to enter NATO. There doesn't seem to be any other reasonable security guarantees that would protect Ukraine from Russia. So this is an important fact to remember. Putin has been humiliated by Ukraine. The prestige of the Russian military forces has been squandered in the last few years. Everyone regarded Russia as having the second most powerful military in the world. Of course, China will soon take that place. So these events over the last 3 years have squandered Russia's prestige and displayed that due to presumably corruption within the Russian economic system, that logistically and otherwise their military was in fact unable to perform in such a manner that they could have defeated Ukraine within months. So until he takes his last breath, Putin will have a fundamental burning hatred of Ukraine, and he will use every possible way, method, technique, action to undermine Ukraine and any subsequent arrangement that may be in place, unless there are ironclad guarantees by such as Ukraine being in NATO, and if attacked, then they can utilize Article 5 of the NATO Charter, and that is that all states must respond. An attack on one state is seen as an attack on all, and therefore all states must respond. Russia, in terms of their military prowess, would have serious difficulties with NATO as it's structured. Having said that about Trump, I think we need to remember one thing. So in his first term, he did go to Europe, and of course he tried to shake things up there. And one of the things he said was, you're not pulling your weight. You're not spending enough on your defense budgets, and America is pulling all of the weight and taking all of the responsibility for keeping their military ready. He was right. The very first thing that Germany did after Ukraine was invaded was put $100 billion or euros into the German defense structure. That was how badly they were run down. And then they had to say, we've got a war on our doorstep. If Russia flattens Ukraine, we could be next. Now, Putin, as I've said, he will use every trick in the book to undermine any subsequent treaty or arrangement. If he's not able to use direct military force because of, for instance, a NATO response, he will use other means. He'll engage in perhaps cyber warfare against Ukraine. He'll, in the border regions, make incursions, agitate for independence from the eastern part of Ukraine. He may also use what are called false flag operations, which reportedly he has used previously, and is just a common technique from the dictator's playbook. So, with Putin in power, there is no peace. But to my point of view, the only guarantee for Ukraine to be free of direct military aggression from Russia is incorporation into NATO. We'll see what happens there. The other thing that I wanted to say and to stress, and this will form a backdrop to all of my videos, is that as a Christian, and as someone who's been brought up in Christian culture and the Christian West, there's a statement from the New Testament, and that says, so Jesus was quoted as saying, "Why are you worried about the speck in your brother's eye when you have a log in your own?" So essentially he was saying we mustn't look at the faults of others, the speck in another's eye, without looking at our own faults, inadequacies, errors, sins. So if we look at our own history of conflict, so I called the Russian attack on Ukraine, quoting Chomsky, an act of criminal stupidity, and it is certainly that. But I do not know how to characterize otherwise the Vietnam War, for instance. This stupid, wasteful conflict, which was instigated without any direct threat upon the United States of America or other nations. In fact, Australia did, as we know, participate in that. And I have no issue, and I'm not blaming servicemen and servicewomen who participated in that conflict. This was the orders they received. But the politicians in that case also made a huge error, and Vietnam also could be characterized as an act of criminal stupidity instigated by the politicians of that time. And as we know, at that time, America was entrapped in this pathological hatred of communism in any form, and was attempting to, as we know, prop up the democracy of South Vietnam against the North and Ho Chi Minh and the communists. So we must look also to our own errors, and further down the track we're still engaging in these utterly stupid, counterproductive conflicts, and the most recent of which was the Iraq War. Now again, with Saddam Hussein, there's very few people could have any sympathy for his fate. He was a monster, and ruthlessly ruled that country and was responsible for huge numbers of deaths and so on. He started a war against Iran, as we know, and that conflict led to many, many deaths. But following the terrorist attacks on New York and the Pentagon, the neocons in Washington at that time decided that Saddam had to go. There was this assumption that there were weapons of mass destruction that could be used against the United States. Of course, as we know, that was proved to be false. The intelligence services of both the United Kingdom and the United States got that seriously wrong. In fact, Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction at all. And it should have been simply understood that the only person that Saddam Hussein cared about was Saddam Hussein and remaining in power in Iraq. He would never have directly challenged the United States because he knew that that would have led to his obliteration. So there was a lot of posing and posturing because his archenemy was Iran, and he felt he could keep them off guard if they felt that he had weapons of mass destruction. So these neocons in Washington, they led America and the forces of the willing into Iraq. And we know what the subsequent history of that, but trillions of dollars were wasted, and there was a massive loss of life, and it would be questionable as to whether Iraq is any better place than it was under Saddam Hussein. And the other significant thing, counterproductive thing that did was, in my view, it hastened the nuclear weapons program of Iran, because the Iranians and others in the Middle East would have been thinking, who's next? And therefore the only credible deterrent or defense they would have would be the production of a nuclear weapon. It's the ultimate deterrent. Unfortunately, Iran, they have used this program. They are or have been attempting to develop nuclear weapons, and have made completely irresponsible and dangerous statements such as, we'll wipe Israel off the face of the map. Other unacceptable statements such as that. So the American and the Allies, and like Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at that time, was hell-bent on getting into Iraq with British forces. For some reason, he didn't caution America. Germany did. They said they would not participate. Their intelligence was obviously far better than that of the British or of the United States. So again, I'm quite happy to criticize my own country, my own tradition when that is necessary, because we have to look to the faults of ourselves and of our own. Having said that, any defense, any support of Ukraine is fully and completely justified because of the nature of the threat at the moment. Putin is not just posturing, he is actually attacking. He is driven by this senseless idea of the reconstitution of the Soviet Empire, and Europe will be next. He's an ex-KGB officer. He did serve in Eastern Germany of that time under communist rule. I believe he was based in Dresden, and he speaks fluent German. But it was part of the Soviet Empire at that time, along with the Baltic states and Poland, and that is his ultimate aim. And there will be no peace. There will always be that threat, and even more so now because Putin has this burning grievance, this burning hatred of Ukraine for the embarrassment that it has caused him. There is no other way but providing as much support, assistance and help to Ukraine as we can. The only language that Putin understands is appropriate military defense and deterrence. And so that's all I wanted to say today. Again, you'll find this thread running through my videos. I'm not just here to criticize and provide commentary on other states such as Russia. I will do that when that is necessary. But Also, I will be looking at the log in our own eyes, and that is the senseless wars that the West has waged, as I've said, in countries like Vietnam. And, we talk about Russia and the vast environmental damage, the deaths of civilians, and so on, the squandering and waste of life. But in Vietnam, this was the case also. We used this Agent Orange to devastate the environment of Vietnam. As we know, the rationale at that time was that the communist insurgency, the communist forces were actually unable to be detected because they were under foliage. And then the Americans denuded that with Agent Orange, so that these communist insurgents could be seen. And we had these dreadful massacres there as well. And I believe, from memory, there was one, the My Lai massacre, where civilians were killed. But it was a terrible, brutal, wasteful, unnecessary conflict. I think in the West, we've got to get into this mindset where if a country is directly threatened by some other country, then we have a right to self-defense. However, we've got to clearly determine what that threat is. Now, in the case of Ukraine, this is blatant military aggression by Russia. Putin will not stop at Ukraine. He is hell-bent on reconstituting the Soviet Empire. As I've mentioned in my previous video, this in itself is a task that is impossible. There is no empire in history that has been able to reconstitute itself. The Soviet Empire is gone. Whatever happens subsequently in Ukraine, the Russians, as the central power, will not be able to reconstitute the Soviet Empire. We'll just have this constant warfare, and it will bleed everyone. And of course, the Russians are facing a huge demographic crisis. Their population is shrinking, and this is why, again, Putin was motivated to initiate this conflict, because the population of Russia is declining. And whenever you instigate a war, you need to have an adequate supply of young, fit males in order to fight your wars. This has always been the case. So Russia has this huge demographic problem, which of its own making has made worse due to the Ukraine conflict. So that's all I've got to talk about today. I'm going to bring you some other interesting points of discussion, and one of my next videos coming up will be about anti-Semitism in Australia, what is happening there. And again, I'll be looking at that through the perspective of our own issues with anti-Semitism and our own guilt around that. So we're going to have a discussion about that, and I'm going to talk about this horrific manifestation of anti-Semitism in Australia and across the Western world. I'm going to talk about that as well, and I'm going to provide some commentary and a picture of what's happening with that at the moment here in Australia. So I do thank you for dropping by. Please provide some comment. If there's anything that you would like me to talk about, please do let me know if you're interested in what's happening in Australia. Please do let me know if there's any issues you'd like me to discuss. I'm just a mug, a man in the street who happens to be a mug and happens to be grumpy all of the time. But as I say, if you're not grumpy, you don't really understand what's going on. That's all for today. Thank you very much for dropping by. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.